Hey everyone and welcome! Lately I've been playing more evolution type games such as Elysian, Eclipse and Adapt, and it occurred to me that while I play these Spore-like games, I should make some Spore-likes into my Spore so that while I play Spore I can have my Spore-likes in Spore while I'm playing Spore, or something to that extent. So for this video I'm going to be recreating the mascots from these key games such as Thrive, Adapt and Elysian Eclipse, and I'll be beginning with Red from Adapt. So, with Red, my first thought was the fact that this is a much more simpler, more cutesy design, which, while it suits the charm of Adapt very well, it would have been a bit too basic or primitive in Spore, so I decided to try and approach this with a bit more proportions. I want him to be a bit more angular, not quite as curved, and especially in the key art, it really gives me the impression of some kind of theropod. Now, of course, I imagine Red is probably more of an amphibious creature, but it still gives me a bit of a theropod-like vibe, so I tried to translate that into this by giving it a very large and long raptor-like tail, and then some nice big meaty legs like that of a Tyrannosaurus. Now, I didn't overlook the hooves on this. I'm aware that they've got some nice peaceful looking feet, so I added in the hooves, but instead of the existing toes that they normally have, I gave it some very large blunt claws, if you will. That way it's not for slashing, but still just like a nice extra detail to make the creature stand out a little bit more. And I also added a couple of rings or donuts from Pandora's toolbox just to add like a bit of wrinkles and flesh around the feet, which I then added to the neck as well, just so you define the neck a little bit more from the rest of the creature. And then when it came to the tail, I did consider having it be a very flexible tail, since in Spore, if you add additional joints to the limbs, and if you add enough of them, it can make a very nice and smooth, flexible, wobbly kind of animation, but then unfortunately that wouldn't have looked good with the membrane. I used flattened spheres from Pandora's toolbox to create the actual membrane of the amphibious tail, and with highly flexible tails, it would have just clipped and overlapped and just looked really bad, so I elected to keep a very rigid tail, very rigid animation, but have it look really good. And I think I struck quite a nice balance. And then when it came to the heads, I don't know why there's one particular fish head just really stuck out to me. I used the replicant textures version, so I had the correct coloration, but I still added a vanilla version of the head inside the mouth as well. That way when it roars, you can still see like an actual fleshy mouth and not just a weird textureless red. And then once I added a couple more wrinkles around the base of the head and neck, it was then time to add some keratin horns for the tusks, which I fitted in with a jelly button and a ethereal razor to make it look like that the tusks were actually inside the creature's jaw and that the roots transitioned throughout its skull. And then it came to the eyes, which were a bit of an interesting thing on its own, since for one, I really never use stalk eyes. I don't know why, I just really don't like them. And two, the best pair I had to fit this, they kind of arched the wrong direction. They arched outwards, whereas Red's eyes kind of arch inwards towards each other. So to achieve this, I made the eyes asymmetrical by holding A and pressing both of them, and then I selected each eye and did Control F to flip the symmetry. So they're still asymmetrical, they're in the flipped positions, as opposed to if I just manually placed everything, and I would have taken a very long, tedious amount of time. And then once I added the white coloration for the eyes and some whiskers, Red was complete, and I really do like my interpretation. It still has that simplistic charm that I really like from Adapt, but it just feels right more at home in Spore. A bit more angular, a bit more upright, and looking damn good. Feeling good about Red, I then moved on to the Disturbance, which was the mascot of Thrive. Now, I actually have already made this once before. My interpretation was based very literally on the key art of the Disturbance, where I was asymmetrical and posing, and I didn't want to just do that all over again. I wanted mine to be a bit more different and just like Red, actually function in the Spore editor and look right at home. So I had a good look at the Disturbance and I concluded it really reminded me of that of a centaur, since it has 6 limbs, 3 of which are held upwards and the other 3 are planted on the ground. So this makes me think of some kind of adaptoped where it probably could walk on 2, 4 or 6 whenever it wanted to, just kind of bend down or lean upwards. So I thought to myself, okay, a centaur, so 4 legs and 2 arms would probably be a good balance to this. Since I think if I made a creature that was just walking on all 6 legs for the Disturbance, I think it just would have looked a bit strange and uncanny, but having the centaur pose here is kind of like a nice medium balance. However, it did mean that the spacing between the shoulders and hips and, well, technically the base of all 3 limbs, the spacing was a little bit strange, but I felt like that once I added a bit of musculature, a bit of definition, especially to the torso, I was able to kind of make it work and just kind of make it look more natural. Since if you look at a regular centaur, they got a lot of torso and a lot of stomach, and of course this one doesn't. All the limbs are coherently connected, and there is no start and end to a torso or stomach, at least not compared to a traditional centaur. Anyway, yes, once I added in a bunch of details, especially some ribs, collarbones, the strange feature that it has around its neck, I then looked at the back and the back was feeling a little bit weird and bare, so I added a couple of just little pokes of vertebrae, nothing too big, but just to try and transition the back to a much nicer surface. And then I moved on to the head, which included more eye stalks, which I tipped with Pandora's Toolbox spheres to get that nice trademark yellowish orange glow. And then by the end of it, again, I was very happy with my Disturbance. I distinctly wanted it to be different to my original creation I made a couple of years ago, and I quite like this one. It again feels more organic, more natural in the Spore editor. It animates nicely, and I'm quite pleased with this one. And then we move on to our third mascot, and that is Blorb from Elysian Eclipse. Now, as of recording this, Elysian Eclipse has no limbs and has no movement animations, so I'm basically making quite literally a blob, hence the name Blob. And this is interesting because where I wanted to make an organic creature, I could just copy-paste the creation into Spore, but I wanted to make a creature, you know, something functional. So I kind of imagined Blob as a bit of a penguin, bear with me here, where it had very stumpy little legs, perhaps it was sitting down, not entirely decided. It had a big fatty tail, which helped the whole sitting concept. The spine on the original Blob is very crooked, so I elected to have a much more flexible neck instead. And to simulate the crooked spine, I instead had a sail, kind of like that of a Spinosaurus, or maybe more like the membrane of the amphibious tails that Red had. Obviously not quite exact, but overall just like a nice big mass or feature to replace the otherwise a very crooked spine. When it came to the head, so Blorb's face consists of 3 cylinders, and like I mentioned as of recording, there aren't really any functional mouths, aside from the cell stage ones, there aren't like any proper snapping mouths like in Spore or Adapt, so I really had to try and reimagine this one. I originally considered imagining the 3 cylinders as 3 sets of proboscis, you know? I thought about that, and whether I made them long and thin or short and chunky, I just really didn't like it. Maybe it's because I'm not much of a alien creator, but it just seemed really weird to have 3 of them. So eventually I decided to imagine the 3 cylinders as 3 jaws. So it's a 3-jawed creature. So while I haven't decided on the diet of this creature, I did add a couple of hooks on the tip of each jaw. And the flesh I added to connect the jaws together did have a couple of extra teeth as well, so it's looking a bit carnivorous. So I wanted to make sure that I kept in the trademark big purple eyes, and when I did so, it gave the creature such a weirdest clash of creepy and cute. When it came to adding the back set of eyes, I really didn't like adding another set of eyes to the back of the skull in this creature. It just looked really, really weird. So to keep the consistency between Red and the Disturbance, I gave Blorb stalk eyes as well. And I feel like that really helped set it off, especially as now I can imagine the stalk eyes looking backwards anywhere so it keeps its full vision. And then it came to the markings on the front. So I did think about keeping its markings, but I thought to myself, a big meme in the Elysian Eclipse community is that Blorb is God, Blorb is the Spode of Elysian Eclipse. And so I looked at the little purple markings, and they kind of look like arms doing like a bit of a praying gesture, or like as if it's got its fingertips connected to each other, as if it's like deep in thought or scheming, like that kind of idea, and I really couldn't unsee it. So I thought in the end, alright, you know what, let's just give this guy purple arms, and I tried to rebuild like a similar kind of stance. And in the end, I like my creativity. I like the way I've interpreted it. Though whether the community likes it is to be determined, as this is a very different take on Blorb, but one that again I think fits in with Spore editor quite nicely. And there we have it then. That is my Spore takes on 3 mascots from 3 evolutionary based Spore-like games. Kind of makes sense to kind of bring it all together, and I'm really happy with the results so far. And now that I have all 3, I gotta say, it kind of reminds me of the starters of Pokemon, and now I'm wondering, you know, hence evolutionary type games, I wonder what it would look like if all these creatures evolved. Let me know what you think and if you'd like to see that. I think that'd be quite a fun idea for another video, seeing the evolutionary progress of Red, Blob and the Disturbance. I think that'd be really cool. But as always, that's me about done for today, so thank you all so much for watching, and I really hope that you've enjoyed it. Hope you like my interpretations, and as always, I'll see you all again next time. Cheers!